And today's webinar will be focusing on how to identify and defend your research methods and methodologies. And basically what we want you to get out of this webinar is to understand a bit the whereabouts of research methods and methodologies and why students often do struggle, as well as showing that research methods don't pop out of the blue, and it has not much to do with creativity. We will also touch on how to apply research methods and how to present them within the thesis. And hopefully overall, the outcome should be that actually it's a straightforward but gradual undertaking to work out your research methods. With this, let us start a bit with the whereabouts of the research methods. Now, the main point is that the methods are an integral part of your study. They will be developed gradually, starting from your thesis proposal, where you have initially outlined what you consider doing. But as you go through your research, this will be further defined step by step, and consequently, it will be presented through the entire thesis. At each part of it, all of the chapters will cover some part of the methods and will demonstrate the methodologies that you have been applying. Now, with this, what is the difference in between methods and methodology? Method is the practical hands-on steps for doing the research. So basically, what are you using, how are you doing things, and why are you doing this? And the conjunction of that will be the methodology. And the methodology, as it is in your thesis written up, needs to achieve three things. Firstly, consider the nature of the academic work. Secondly, discuss what method researchers have traditionally used. And thirdly, explain what methods this particular project uses and why. Now, bringing those two together, the two understandings, I think it is very important to understand the nature of research. The nature of research is to build on existing best practice, to draw on the literature, to go further in advance on existing knowledge. So this also means that whatever you're doing is drawing on methods that have been used in the past, on methodologies that have been put together that provide you with an orientation. So this is to say, it's a very non-creative process of working. Often one starts with a research proposal and considers, now what will I do? Which type of methodology will I use? Which type of study am I going to do? Now, this is actually, as a matter of fact, not the smartest way to work, because one should work over the problem and then the method will lend yourself to the research. So it's not that you are hunting the method, but it's that the methods will come to you, and they will come to you first and foremost through literature that you read and through related studies. So this will inform how you put your initial research proposal together, but also how later on the thesis will emerge. And as you go ahead and carry out the research, you will understand that there are many methods that could have been applied and that you perhaps would have wanted to apply, and that you will perhaps even still apply, because it's not such things that you set on a method like in a consultancy project and then you just execute it and at the end you write up what you have been doing, but it's rather that you learn as you go along, and this learning also provides you with different ways on applying the methods initially identified by you, but also to experiment with a number of methods that ultimately will build up the methodology of your study. This also means it's an emergent thing. It's not only gradual development, but also emergent development. And only by the end, once you have been doing the research and are writing up the final version of the thesis, you will be in the position to write up ultimately the methodology of your research study. So it's not a thing that is done initially in the proposal and then executed and it stays as static as that, but it is developing as you go along. Is that making sense to everyone?
Yes.
Are there any questions till this point? Okay, let's move into the second part of the presentation. Why students often struggle to select a method. Now, that's actually quite clear. And as initially said, students simply struggle because they want to select a method before they know first the research problem, second, the existing studies of relevance to the problem, and third, the wider literature in the research field. So if I start to select a method before I actually know the research problem, how do I know that this method will qualify to explore this problem? That's a tricky thing. So one needs to find some anchor literature that will provide one with some initial guidance. So even if the problem understanding changes through the research, this initial angle will provide you with some stability and entry route into your research. And I think the entry route is very important. Now, while that sounds simple, in practice it often is not. And one of the main reasons that I have come across over and over again is a bias toward actions. It's not uncommon that at like the first months of the study or of the doctoral journey, students already say, okay, I will do that survey, I will ask that questions. There's a rush for urgency and to create results. Now, this is not the smartest way to do. Questions don't pop out of the blue. It's not something where one needs to be inventive. It's rather that the literature will provide you with some questions that have been asked, some answers that have been provided, and on that, one should build. So this comes to the next point. At the beginning, one actually does not know about the existing studies and whether or not they are of relevance to the problem, simply because if you don't know the problem, you also won't know what is of relevance and what is not. Now, this sure is a tricky thing, and only gradually one will be able to overcome this. And there are a number of ways that can guide one to do so. The first is identify initial studies that roughly have dealt with the same things and that will point you to how methods can work or cannot work out. I think this is very important. The problem here is, though, that literature is not only overwhelming, but sheer endless. So one could read, and not only could, but in practice often does, spend a good amount of months to just get an insight of the wider literature. And reading is easy, and reading is providing one with a lot of ideas. So this is a tricky thing to know where to stop. And what I said initially, having an anchor literature identified provides one method. That method provides one way of testing to engage with stakeholders, and that will create already a bit of further knowledge that helps you guiding your research further and to gradually build up the methods used. I think the main point here is to understand the non-linearity of research, why a thesis reads very linear, as if at the first day already it was clear what the problem was and which methods will be applied to explore the problems. In practice, it is not. So this one needs to take into account. once reading the wider literature, there are a number of questions that should be answered, like the relevance, the methods that have been successfully applied, how are these different, and how I will combine them. As said, this is all gradually and nothing that one will figure out from the beginning. So with this, we come into the third part of the webinar. Are there any questions till this point? Any things you would want to clarify or ask?
I have a question. Good afternoon from Switzerland. So
Hello.
this is Agustinos speaking. So I would like to ask, how does it work when some researchers start by the methodology and then they move on to the literature review? Because I've heard this type of scenarios.
You mean you start with a predefined methodology to then engage with the literature?
Right. I've heard some people who start by the methodology, by defining the methodology, and after this, they move on towards the literature review, which is quite weird for me. I mean, personally, I'm in the 5th year now of my doctoral studies, and I'm finalizing the literature review, and then I will move on to the methodology. But those who start by the methodology, how do they do it?
Well, if you are not having a theoretical study that wants to examine if a methodology or how a methodology works out for a particular case, I would find it hard to start with a methodology if, and this is now the precondition, if the problem is still not known or fully clear. Now, if the problem is fully understood and clear, you might be able to start by selecting methodology, but then again, you would need to have some pre-knowledge on existing studies. I mean, elsewise, it's rather a gamble whether or not this method would work. And by the end of the day, once you carried out the research, what you could mainly evaluate, I would argue, is whether or not that methodology worked out and how it worked out. What you can perhaps not that well argue is whether you explored the problem and understood the problem. So I think if the focus is on understanding how a method works out, then you might well start with a method. But if the focus, and I think this should be the focus, is to understand the problem, then I am not sure how one can start with selecting a method first before selecting a problem. I mean, it's research is about a research problem. And to examine the problem, one needs a method. So this means there's a dependency in between the research problem and the research method. So if you start with a research method, that neglects the application field on where it would be used in. Does that answer make any sense?
Absolutely, and thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, very well.
Yeah, Andreas?
Can I ask, please?
Yeah. Oh,
Yep.
sorry. Okay, can I go? Yeah?
There were 2 questions. Who wants first?
I can come second.
Okay, who was the first?
Okay, I can ask. This is Mohammed from Kuwait. Could you please explain the difference between methods and methodology, please, again?
Okay. Now the method is a particular way of work. So let's say you take grounded theory together as a method, together with doing a case study, so you examine only one organization. So those are 2 methods. And you combine it with the action research approach, where you engage with the stakeholders within the organization, so to explore how this problem occurs in the organization under certain circumstances. This means, in this case, you combine 3 methods: grounded theory, the case study approach, as well as action research, which together all forms your methodology. And the methodology then will include many further information, like the setup of your study, when has it started, which stakeholders were engaged, at which point in time were they engaged, how have they been engaged. All of this together is a methodology that you applied for your particular study. Is that making sense?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Welcome. Any?
Okay, yeah, Andres, mine, yes, for those who are new, this is Ini calling from Nigeria. Yeah, Andres, my question was more on the fact that in our DBA, naturally, we're starting off first from identifying our organizational problem. And then based on the fact that it's a DBA and we do know that we are geared towards an action research, I get a bit confused because take for example, I was looking into the problem of acceptance of technology in my organization. And a lot of the literature I came across is quantitative in nature. But based on what I'm trying to solve of the problem, I geared towards the qualitative approach. So I don't know if that is knowledge for others, but that is the only way I was able to get an understanding of the perceptions of the people into the non-usage of the information system. So I'm just reiterating the fact that yes, you must first know the research problem before you go thinking about any other methodology that may be appropriate. But from literature that I gained, existing literature, much of what I found in the information system body was quantitative.
Thank you. I think that's useful knowledge and it well taps in to exactly what's coming in the third part of this webinar on how to derive and in particular also justify your research methods. As you just said, in your case, you are asked to apply a particular method within your methodology, which in this case is action research. Now, obviously, if you just say, well, the university required me to apply action research, that wouldn't qualify as an argument for why you have been using action research. It must qualify because you derive it from existing studies that explored a similar problem and that also used action research. So this in combination with other methods that you might apply, which well can be also quantitative in nature and be combined with qualitative ones, will provide the reasoning and arguing for why you have been using this, and it will put you on the safe side. This is very important in particular as research is actually about disagreement as much as it is about creating knowledge. So if you discuss with another scientist, and latest in the Viva, you will have the chance of doing so, the other scientist might disagree with what you've been doing. However, if you objectively can explain it in a way that can also be challenged and tested, you will be put on the safe side, even if there's disagreement. Very rarely that would lead to failure. I mean, it's all about constructing knowledge and on understanding how things do work out. So if you applied a method in perhaps a different way, that either might be seen as innovative or it might be seen as something done in a wrong way, in a way that is messing with the results. So I think it can show both, but if you show how you have been doing it, that you derived it from other studies that worked out or didn't work out, and the things that didn't work out you tried to mitigate, then it will put you certainly on a good argumentation base. And overall, it's a learning journey. So no one expects you in your doctoral study to be a master in your field, in a field that you still just are about to learn about, where you build up your knowledge on the problem end, but also on the research end. So this is a journey, and it's clear and understandable that once you do things for the first times, you will not do it as well as having done it for 10 years already. So But as long as you work in a structured way, this will put you on the safe side. And I think it's important to don't forget that element of learning journey, because there are so many things that are to be trained over the period of the doctoral study. And if you look at this slide, it just shows some of the outcomes that by the end of your research hopefully have been trained, and it's a large and fast array of things. So at the point in time you write your research proposal, all of what you see here was not that well developed. So including the research, your knowledge about research methods and how to work with them. So this is to be gradually built up. And that also means that it is clear that not everything will have been done up to the most possible professional standards. But in the final thesis, this learning should be demonstrated. And therefore, the way you present your method in the within the methodology section, but also across the thesis, as we will still look into, should be a mirror of this learning having been taken place. Is that making sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Moving into the next, how to apply research methods. Now, if we look at this example, we see an extract from a thesis that is providing within the data findings and analysis chapter some discourse and discussion. And what one can see here is both. On the one hand, there's evidence on how methods have been applied. In this case, FG stands for focus groups. So there's a dialogue around how focus groups were executed, how they have been working out, which type of participants were involved, what was found out. So it's very geared and focused towards exploring a problem and creating knowledge. And it is drawing on existing studies, and all of those existing studies will provide us with potentially further hints on how related problems have been researched and which type of methods have been used, which type of questions have been asked, what has been working out well. So this provides us with a very structured way on working out our method and what we will be doing within our study. I would argue that the most critical things at the beginning is to find related studies, even if the understanding of the problem is still blur and not clear, but the bigger issue will be clear. And if you find studies that are very detailed, they can provide you with a lot of guidance on how to further build up your work. Is that making sense to this point?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Because we now will look into the reverse engineering, which I think is a very important thing to do, because as the knowledge builds up, as the research advanced, as more one becomes experienced, as more one will be able to express what has been done and how it has been done, which type of methods have been used, and this then should be reverse engineered into the thesis, so to look like so to provide a consistent narrative, and that looks like from the first day it was already known how this research would emerge and what would be done, which surely cannot be done at the start of the thesis, but at the end. So reverse engineering is a crucial thing that should be trained, and it should be done throughout the entire thesis. It's not a point, it's not that one is doing it only at the end, because at the end you will have so many information that it's very, very difficult to re-engineer. And if you do it consistently, it will also allow you, it will serve you as a tool and guide you through your thesis. And you can do that if you build up gradually your thesis, and if you try to keep a high level overview on it, and the table of content allows you very well to keep a high level overview of your thesis. Now this is an example using music instruments, and it allows you to immediately see what is missing, what is there, and how things do match with each other. And this, together with keeping an overview what you have in your proposal, how things are emerging, is a very good and useful tool to guide you and to gradually build up the methods and the methodology as such as your study goes along. If you haven't come across mirroring, we were running webinars on this earlier. Please take a look at those slides. It's a very useful tool so to guide you through your thesis. Before we come into the final part of the webinar, are there any questions on how to apply research methods?
Yes, Andreas, if I'm allowed to ask something, as an experienced researcher, how do you see a thesis? I mean, is in your eyes a thesis like a full research project, or is it lower in value than the research that someone follows up with later on?
Can you give me an example? I'm not sure.
Right. So at this stage, I'm working on my doctorate focused on global hospitality and tourism management education. So this is my thesis. If everything goes well, hopefully in the future, I will move on with more publications. So in your eyes, or in an experienced researcher's eyes, is the thesis of lower value than a research project after someone has completed his doctorate?
Lower value is a relative question. Now, if you consider the training and learning element of doctoral research, this is already a high value because you will come out with invaluable skills that you haven't had before. So to answer on this end. Now, to answer just the thesis element and the publication of research, obviously, as more as you're experienced, as higher, potentially the quality of the research will be. Having said that, probably an experienced researcher will never have the amount of time to look so much into detail into something like one is doing during the doctoral research phase. As a professional researcher, you certainly will know how certain methods work out, and you will apply them. You are quicker on grasping which new methods could be applied to research a problem, and you are quicker to understand how methods could be leveraged across problem domains. But time will be a limiting element. So it's not a straightforward answer. You sure will find it easier to publish in journals, but not only because your research gets better, but because you also will be better networked over time. So you know your peers that review the journals, and you will know the expectations. You will know the way of work, the style, and the critical things. Is that answering the questions?
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So whatever we see today, and also within the other Doctorate Hub webinars, will be also applicable later on. It is not only to help us with our thesis, but this is a method that we will move on by using later on as researchers.
Yes, but it's a conditional yes. We were running a webinar 3-4 weeks ago. Take a look, where I put in examples from published research, and it's in part very dangerous to follow that, because if you do not know the audience of that publication, it can really mislead you. In that case that I presented at that webinar, it was a publication that was targeted at only one reader, and the one reader was the funding, the donor organization. So if you read that with the eyes not knowing that, you will follow the way the research is presented, that's very dangerous, because it was oversimplifying, it was promising already in the question results that would be achieved. It was glorifying itself, which in itself is all understandable, knowing that the audience is a donor organization that needs to be pleased, and you need to explain why millions of euros have been spent on that research. If you do not know the target audience, well, you could be very misguided by this piece of paper. Is that making sense?
Perfect. Yes, perfect. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Are there further questions? Okay, then we come to the final part, talking about guidance and presentation. Now, how to present the research methods within your thesis. I tried it with this very simplifying chart. Now, there's a methodologies chapter that will put forward which methods have been applied and how. Now, this methodology chapter will typically come somewhere after the introduction, perhaps a chapter 2 or chapter 3, depending on the university and the expectations. But it is not where you are starting with. It's first of all the literature review, the existing studies that guide you, and only then you gradually will build it out. But it's represented everywhere in the thesis. It provides you with a structure for the data and results, because you will draw on how existing studies have been doing it. It will provide you with information for how to do the analysis and how to present it. And ultimately, you will mirror that front and back, so that the introduction chapter and the conclusion chapter will provide an initial outline, what's going to come, as well as a wrap up on how things have been working out. So it's all interconnected and gradually coming together. And I think the mirroring technique is a valuable tool to be applied, so to understand how things gradually will work out. Now, this is the fifth and final part of the webinar. Are there any questions to this? Elsewise, I will stop recording and provide you with the open floor.
Can I just make a comment? That last slide actually applies very well for any papers that people are trying to publish as well.
Okay, so then be welcome to also use that as a guidance once you draw up a structure for your paper. I think what can't be forgotten is, as soon as you engage in writing the thesis, there must be a coherent narrative in it. You will be expected to make a consistent use of words. It's clear that initially you will have many different concepts, calling things very differently, using very different terms for it. That is normal. But at a final stage, it's your role and your job to settle on certain key terms, to be aware which are the key terms that you use and where you use it. And you should have this clear understanding, and then you need to take a helicopter perspective on your thesis and make sure that the narrative is consistent and in place, and to work through your thesis. So this is a final thing expected for you to be doing. Now, with this, let me stop the recording